Welcome back into the studio, another pastel lesson for you, and today I'm using a reference photo of a young elephant I took a couple of years ago. And this first section is really going to concentrate on using PanPastels to put in a nice, easy, solid underlayer. And we'll go nice and slow with this one so that everybody can follow, even if you're completely new to PanPastels as well and you're looking to just start with them. And this is not about following along as such, as listing all colours. I've zoomed in quite a bit so you can see how I'm applying the PanPastels. I've got the reference photo right by the side so you can see where I'm applying it and why I'm applying it. Almost out of shot, top left hand corner, you can see, just for my own benefit, I've done my usual dragging out of the colours as well. So that's up there. You don't really need to see that. And also out of shot to the right, I've got a few PanPastels there, and I've got just normal printer paper, which is what I'm mixing it on. Now, I've done loads of videos showing the actual mixing of pans in detail as well, so there's plenty of content for you to go back and look at that, but I can only get so much on screen without zooming so far out that you can't actually see me applying it. Okay, so I wanted to concentrate more about applying it and creating that solid underlayer. Now I've started with brown pastel matte paper, or pastel matte board. I'm using the thicker one just because I had a spare piece there. I've transferred my drawing over using black or graphite transfer paper, just your normal cheap transfer paper. Those small silver things you're seeing on screen, that's just magnets holding everything on board onto the magnetic board in place. I get the magnetic board on Amazon. There's loads of cheap ones on there in all different sizes. There's nothing special about it. And I've got just these magnets off of either Amazon, eBay or somewhere like that as well. Okay, so let's make a bit of a start. Oh, before I go, you can see I'm using that brown pastel matte. I could have used the dark grey as well. I wanted it mid-tone because you can see with the elephant, it's a nice middle tone. The darks will show up on there, the lights will show up, as you'll see soon. And I chose the brown because I've got most of the colours, and you can see with the elephant it's just generally a brown to grey colour. Okay, so that kind of suits it. But I could just as easily have used the mid-tone grey. Okay, let's get started. So I'm mixing pans off screen. As I mentioned, I got loads of videos showing that. I'm using the soft tool, the knife as they call it, with a rounded edge. Could have used the one that's more triangular shaped, doesn't really matter, but with the rounded edge then less chances of getting real hard edges. Now this first application I want it to be nice and smooth looking. Now if you struggle with looking at or getting drawn in by the details too much in these early stages, blur your reference photo. Once again, I've shown lots of videos where I put a Gaussian blur in an image editor like Photoshop or Pixlr or you know, one of the cheap ones, or even free image editors. They're all blur pretty much, and you can do it to a degree with all the little creases and wrinkles are blurred out, and then you're just looking at it as if you would be with squinting with your eyes and just looking at it blurred and concentrating on the major masses. Then don't want to be concentrating on the detail at all. At the end of the demo, or towards the end of the demo, I'll start to put details on top. This is only really a study. The whole thing from start to finish takes me about 2 hours to do, so it's quite fast. But at least then I'll show you how I detail on top of a pastel or PanPastel underlayer. Now if you haven't got PanPastels, you could be doing all this with pencil, or you could be doing it all with soft pastels. And I've shown that as well in other videos, lots of different ways of doing things. But many people are now getting interested in pans and seeing how quick you can put, you know, a base layer in like I'm doing here. This is all in real time at the moment. You can see you can really get a nice base in very, very quickly, and there's only a very small amount of pastel going on the surface. You can see there's virtually no dust at all on there. I'm not blowing it or anything. The tools are pushing it into the surface of the pastel matte paper, so it's really pretty much dust free. So as I'm applying this, I'm squinting across to my reference photo. I'm just thinking, okay, the paper is acting as the mid-tone. I'm just looking now at the highlights at this stage, but already you can see that things are starting to take shape. They're starting to look a bit more three-dimensional, and that's because I'm using the mid-tone paper. If you're the type of artist that uses only a very, very light paper or even white paper, you're probably struggling more than you need to be doing. I only use papers like that on very, very light subjects that's overall light, or something that needs to be extremely vibrant and light as well, and that's usually flowers. Okay, so you can see I'm looking at that reference. I'm thinking, what's the lightest areas, the main areas of highlight. Got the tusk, we're going up onto the trunk here, and the light is just picking out various parts of that where other areas are in shadow. And I can use just a light pressure on this PanPastel tool. You can even see the pencil marks quite clearly through it. PanPastel is not completely opaque. I could put more and more pastel on there and it'd get to the point where you wouldn't really see the lines, but when it's used lightly like this, as you can see, you can pretty much see through it, so you're not losing all the lines underneath, all of your drawing lines. Now we're just about 5 minutes in, and I don't have to be super accurate with this either. You can see that tool is fairly large really for the size of the drawing, and this is indicating to me just where all the highlights are going to be, so that I don't get confused when I start detailing and putting the pencil lines on top of it. Okay, now as I look across at the reference, I don't need a great deal more than that on this first stage. Perhaps a little bit around here as well. And eventually I'll put a bit of green around the elephant, just so it's in kind of an area. It's got a bit of background in there too. So that's the basics done, and what I'll do when I start with, I'll take this stage further than I normally will with pans, so that I can show you how I can really kind of refine, and then I'll be only using the pencils for more of the detail. But you can use pans as much as you want. If you want to go then to the smaller tools again, you can keep refining, and it's surprising the level of refinement you can actually get using just pans on their own, especially if you're working larger. So I've gone a bit lighter now. I've added some white to the mix just to pick out the really bright highlights. Now if you put too much pan down, The pastel mat surface, because it's a cork surface with all fibres on it, you can use some kitchen tissue like this. And I'm only putting light pressure on, but do you notice how it's pretty much staying in the same position, but I'm getting off any excess pastel? So by taking off excess like that, obviously there's even less dust around, and by making sure we haven't got too much pastel on there, I can keep adding layers very easily then on top. Okay, so I've just gone now to a grey pastel, PanPastel. So I've switched mode now from highlight mode to shadow mode. Remember, the paper itself is acting really as the mid-tone. Okay, so this is exactly the same thing I'm doing now, but I'm using the dark pigments, the dark PanPastels, rather than the light PanPastels. But otherwise I'm doing exactly the same thing, just blocking in those major elements. And you can see straight away it's already starting to get a lot more structure to it. The highlights are there. That was quickly done in less than 10 minutes. The mid-tone, as I said, the paper is acting as that. So we're only really concentrating then on the darks and the highlights. I'm using light pressure, just putting as much down as I need to get that kind of tonal value. Just wanted to quickly mention my Patreon channel for those looking for even more in-depth art instruction. It's packed full of pastel videos, oil videos as well, and those videos are being added to new ones every single month. I have videos for the complete beginner that have never done pastels or oils before with just limited supplies, and I take you from the very first blocking in all the way through to the final detailed drawings and paintings. I've also got some really unusual subjects as well, and in all of my videos I always take you through all the details. You see everything I do, how I create my work. But it's not just for beginners, it's also for novices, and I also show the best artwork that I've ever done as well. And this particular elephant video spans 6 hours, so you know you're going to see tons and tons of details, tips and techniques. And as mentioned, I've got lots of oil videos on there too, so there really is something for everybody, and you get access to hundreds of hours worth of videos for just $4. Now over 1,000 members strong. Hope to see you there soon. Now this is exactly the same thing I would do with oils. So I say frequently in my videos that oils and PanPastels are very, very similar. Not in the way that they're applied, of course, because I'd be using a brush with oils now, but in the fact that I'd be using them in an extremely similar way. The blocking in that I'm doing now, I could do that just the same in oils, building up the layers as well, pretty much working from in general a darker underlayer and adding highlights and details on top. It's all the same with oils as well. Now when I put a bit of background in, that's when it'll all really start to look much more three-dimensional and much more realistic. But you can see even with the dark, when it's applied lightly, I can still see my pencil lines just through it. Okay, so perhaps that's a good way of assessing if you're putting too much pastel down. If you can't see your pencil lines through it, then perhaps if you're doing that kind of drawing that needs the detail to go on top, you need to apply less pastel. Now as I'm coming around here, I'm going a bit more careful. So now you can see the structure is really starting to grow on there now. I can see on the trunk I need to go darker. Where the highlight is, I need to go darker, but that's all going to be the refinement. The first thing to concentrate on, get your lights in, get your darks in. Then when that layer or those two layers are done, then I'll come back in and you'll see me refine it. So I'll be looking at the things that are in between the lights and the darks. Now I'm working around on the jaw. I know I'll need some bounce light under there too. With the PanPastels we can layer nice and easily on top of this, so I can make all those adjustments because they're only small adjustments. If under the chin or under the chest area, you can see where that bounce light is, if that was a super bright red, I wouldn't be putting black or dark grey under there. I'd be going in with the reds. Be careful when you've got subjects that are very vibrant. You don't want to put anything dull underneath. With an elephant, you're going to think about that because we're looking at browns and greys. Everything is really quite a dull colour. There's nothing punchy and vibrant colour-wise on there. You can see I'm using the tool that's slightly dirty to help with subduing areas. So areas that were on the trunk that needed to go a bit darker, but not super dark, I could just use that dirty or the bit of pigment that's left on the tool to just go over it lightly, and thus add in a small amount of the darker pigment like I'm doing up here. You see, if you push a bit harder you'll get more of the darkness coming off. If you push lighter you get less of the pigment coming off. So you can adjust the tones. You see how I'm doing it there? Just light pressure. Still squinting at the reference photo, but now I'm starting to put those tones in that are in between, the middle tones, so in between the dark and light. And that's refining what I've already put in there. So if you think the first stage we had pretty much 3 levels of tone. The paper acted as the mid-tone, the light colour or light tone I put on was the highlights, so it was the light tone, and then this dark grey was obviously the shadows, the dark tone. Once I've done those 3, then I'll come in and start adjusting more, creating more steps to the tonal value. Now this chest and leg area is really quite dark, so I'll block that in nice and quickly. That's one of the darker areas on the drawing, and under the chin obviously needs to go a bit darker as well. And as I said, I'll warm this up a bit, add some richer browns in there too. But you can see how much, if you was doing all this with pencil, an area like this would really take your pencil down quite fast. So that's where things like PanPastels and soft pastels have got the advantage then, is in blocking in these larger areas, especially if you're doing a large drawing. Now as I'm coming around on this leg and back, I want a bit more grey here. So you can see I'm adding other subtle colours to my overall colour. On the ear I'll be adding a warmer tone as well. It's also a bit warmer there in the highlight. That's a bit too much, but I can spread it out quite easily. And then a bit darker and a bit warmer here. If anything, I want areas to be slightly darker than I want them in the end. That's allowing me then to put highlights on top. See, it's warmer, richer there as well. And you can spend as long as you want in your underlayer and making it as refined as you want. As I said, this is a study, so I'm not going to take too long with it. Dark again here on the belly. Add a bit of warmth in it. And now I'm coming back into the darkness, the shadow area on the trunk and the forehead, because I can see blues in there. So that's light that's bouncing around from a blue sky, and you generally see that bounce light in the shadow areas. As I'm putting the blue in, you can see how it's starting to look more interesting and also more real, I think. So don't be afraid to, punch that up a bit, even more than you maybe even seeing in the reference photo. It usually looks more interesting for the viewer and adds life to your subject. And it's these subtle colour differences, if you see them, that then differentiates your work from more of a beginner's work. Now if you struggle to see those subtle colours, put the image, your reference photo, in an image editor and then go into the saturation or vibrance and really push it up a lot. It'll look completely fake, but it'll show you where those hidden colours are. And once you've seen them in an extreme example like that, it's easier then to see them subtly in the original reference photo. When you know what you need to look for, you can see it more easily. You see I'm putting a little bit of that blue in the leg as well. Okay, that's starting to look quite good and solid, and even at this stage I can come in with a bit of tissue and just wipe it back a bit. So you can see how Pastel Matte holds the pastel. 90% or even more than that is just staying in place and staying on there. So now I think I've got that base layer there. I think I'll start to put a bit of background in. I'm not going to complicate it like we see in the reference. It's only a study. The main thing I want to show you on this one is the elephant and the underlayer for that. So I'm just going to put a bit of green on you. Already, immediately, now that lighter background is in place, and you can see tonally it's almost exactly the same as the paper. So if you squint at the screen now, you can see the green and the brown pretty much merges together. Okay, so with that bit lighter than the darks on the elephant, that's making the elephant then come forward in the artwork and the background go backwards. Okay, with that underlayer done, I'm assessing it. I think I need to go quite a bit darker now on the shadow area, under the chest, in between the legs here. I think also a bit on the head. I could go darker there as well. It'll go darker when I start to put some detail in with the pencils too, but I want to get it generally fairly accurate at this underlayer stage. And as I mentioned, a bit darker up here too. That'll give more of a stronger feeling of bright sun, so bright highlights, dark shadows. Not putting a great deal on there. Being fairly careful now not to muddy the green too much. I could always go over it, but I don't want anything too dark going into that light green. And a bit more of that blue at the top. I can subdue that then with the grey. So you just drag it into it. That looks quite a bit better now. That's a bit more dramatic again. With that darker up another stage or two. And just to make sure I haven't got too much pastel floating around on the surface, give that a quick rub over with my finger. You see, virtually all of it stays there. So that's my blurry underlayer. Remember, I wanted it to look like I was squinting at it quite hard, and it's really all a fuzzy underlayer. Okay, so let's start looking at detailing it. So I've got a fairly sharp PanPastel pencil. The pit is just about the hardest of the brands, so that sharpens up quite nicely. If you're using something like Caran d'Ache or Gioconda, you're not going to be able to sharpen them like this. Not on a crank handle sharpener or a hand sharpener. They're just going to keep snapping on the ends because they're too soft for details. So I'd use either the pit or perhaps the Carbothello. They're both roughly the same hardness. And I can just about make out the big dark lines, the creases, even through that PanPastel.